Hi. Email. And look at everyone. Oh my gosh. It's 1:30. We're all here and we're gonna start. Look at this. I really appreciate everyone's promptness and being here, and I'm super excited about this workshop because we're gonna learn a lot about what's going on with our enterprise services. And before I make our opening remarks, we'll just go around the room and introduce ourselves. And so I'll start with Nicole, Commissioner Fetham.
Nicole Fetham, Commissioner, District 1.
Rafael Ortega, District 5.
Tim McDonough, District 6.
Sarah Myatt, Senior Program Evaluator with the Health and Wellness. Melinda Dunaway, Manager of Enterprise Services.
Gina Mosser, the Director of Enterprise and Administrative Services.
Karen Francois, Deputy County Manager of Information and Public Records.
You haven't done that in 2 years.
I have not.
We'll ease our way back in.
Thank you.
Ryan O'Connor, County Manager.
Oh, we're not using these.
Tony Carter, District 4.
And Mary Jo McGuire, Commissioner, District 2. And so we'll go over there with you.
I'm Tracy Nelson. I'm a consultant with ROIG working.
Me Chang, Chief Clerk. Charlotte Forsyth, I'm Minister
And online, Trista,
Hi.
Commissioner Maniscalco, I did not forget you.
It's okay. Trista Maniscalco, District 3.
Yes, thank you. All right, well, welcome everyone to this amazing workshop on information and from the Information and Public Records Service team. Just want to give you a few pieces of background information about this. If you've had a chance to look at the presentation, it's chock full of great information. The last time that Enterprise Services presented to the board was in a workshop in March of 2021, so about a year ago. So now, just over a year later, we're back to provide an update over the past year. Since March, the board has significantly invested in enterprise services. That's us, have significantly invested in enterprise services through our budget, and when we have formally established the enterprise services division within our regular biennial budget. And so the team is growing and developing in response to the residents' and community's needs. As enterprise services continues to evolve and we look towards a hopeful post-pandemic world and return to the workplace, the timing of this workshop provides us with a great opportunity for enterprise services to discuss how our county and community opening back up allows for increased collaboration and partnerships. I want to recognize the enterprise services team who has just introduced themselves for their work and dedication to the residents of Ramsey County as you have continued to work in person directly with residents throughout the pandemic, putting yourselves at increased risk in order to serve our community. And I want to thank the whole Enterprise Services team for that. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you all, as we all are, about your work. What I'd like is if you would hold your questions till the end, because this is a huge presentation, and maybe they'll answer some of your questions. Unless they're clarifying, then we'll take them, but otherwise we'll let them get through their presentation, and then we can answer questions at the end. So with that, Deputy County Manager Francois, I'm going to let you have the floor, or County Manager O'Connor, did you want to say something first? Yes, right to Karen. right to Deputy County Manager. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. It's really a pleasure to be here. As Ryan pointed out, this is the first time I've sat at this table in a very long time. So it's really great to be here. And it's really great to be here to talk about the work of enterprise services because, as Commissioner McGuire said, there's a lot of work that's been going on, and it's all been really great work. I am just honored and privileged to be here to be a part, even just a small part of what these ladies and the team have been doing. This group of folks champion having a growth mindset. They champion continuous improvement and failing forward, always looking to our residents and our internal partners in collaboration to find new and better ways, always, to serve our residents more effectively and efficiently and to serve them with excellence. So I'm not going to say anything else except this one thing. This is going to be a really great conversation that we're going to have. There's a lot of information here, and I think you're going to be very pleased. But one of the best things about this conversation that we're going to have is that it is not about our all-time favorite conversation of the day, and that is redistricting. So we can set that aside for the time being, and I'm going to turn it over now to Katrina.
Very much. Thank you, Chair, Commissioners, and Deputy County Manager for your kind words and introducing us. I'm excited to be here today. Like you, I haven't sat at this table for at least 2 years. And I've sitting at the table the first time in this role, and Melinda too as well. So we're happy to be here in our new roles and be with you guys in person for the first time in a long time. So very happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation and being able to update you guys on all over the past year. So, so you guys know what our agenda is. Already had our wonderful introduction from Karen, and we'll just be going through a little bit of review, kind of refresher and grounding of what Enterprise Services objective is, how we got to where we are today, which will include some of our surveys that we've done with residents over the past year, and also some of the work that we did specifically at Metro Square when the service center moved there to survey residents. You'll see some data on that and data on resident interactions over the last year and a half or so of Enterprise Services. And then we'll move from that into looking into the future and some of our next steps for Enterprise. So myself, Melinda, and Sarah will be doing the bulk of the presentation, and like I said, look forward to the conversation. So some of the key takeaways that we're hoping to bring home with you guys and have a kind of key grounding point for today is that contrary to last year when we were on a project budget and still figuring out our footing and kind of figuring out where we were going last March, even though I wasn't part of this, I wasn't in my role last March, but I listened to the workshop very attentively. Now we are fully operationalized and growing in Enterprise Services, thanks in large part to the budget that you all approved for Enterprise Services last year. We are now formally a new division within our department, and like I said, growing. And like Karen said, we continue to have that growth mindset as we go forward. And one of the key parts of the Enterprise Services team is our structure and culture, and I think one of the really unique things and parts of the team that we want to hold on to is that we were built as an enterprise-wide team. We were built to serve the resident enterprise-wide. So as we've all talked about, and as I've been part of conversations since my time when I started in Ramsey County, is breaking down those silos and really getting out of that department mindset and getting to the county mindset. The Enterprise Services team doesn't have that history and that culture of that silo. So we really were built as an enterprise-wide group and want to keep that mindset as we go and not get into, a culture of, well, this is our department, this is the way we really, the way that we have seen that work is to really ground ourselves in being resident-centric and having that community collaboration throughout our work so that we continue to have that mindset of we are learning and hearing from our residents and continuing to grow and really champion the transformational change that we know our residents want and our community needs over. The other piece is, as we all knew pre-pandemic, as we worked in the strategic facilities and thinking about service centers, we knew there was a key role that Enterprise Services is now playing that filled a gap for our community to really connect residents with the county and services and help them navigate. So we knew there was that gap and that role that we wanted to fill. And now during the pandemic, we started filling that, but it was a pandemic filling of the role. So now as I knock on wood and cross whatever when I say this, but if we are moving out of the pandemic phase, how do we continue to figure out what that role is, how we can fill those gaps and continuously improve the resident experience and outcomes in our work. So as I said, I'll go through the next few slides pretty quickly because this is not new information, but it has been a year since maybe you've seen this. So the Enterprise Services objective really is focused on creating those best possible outcomes for residents and their experience with our county, and really striving towards that transformational change that we know our residents want and our community expects. And our guiding principles really drive the work. So again, I won't read through all of these, but just so that we highlight them, really starting out with that resident-centric experience, ensuring that we are understanding the impacts of racial and health inequities in our community and striving to reduce those. Also removing barriers for our residents as they access county services. And really trying to improve the overall effectiveness for our residents. I'll just pause here particularly to highlight the effectiveness versus efficiency. We talk about it a lot in our work, that we want it to be the most effective possible for our residents. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the most efficient. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the most efficient for us, but if we're removing the barriers and making it most effective for our residents, they will have the better outcome. Of course, we want to get to the point where we're reducing the complexity for everyone and we're getting more efficient. But that first step towards that might mean that our complexity is more or our efficiency is reduced, but the effectiveness for the resident is better. And then also really building that culture of service. We not only is in a everyday way try to understand and meet the needs of our residents, but also training. The whole team culture is really focused around that culture of service. And throughout, Melinda and I will try to highlight some stories that we heard from residents and navigators over time. So this is just one example of the quote down at the bottom of this slide. Is to give you a little bit of background, I won't go into too much detail on the story, but there was a woman who came into Metro Square Service Center. And she was clearly in some distress, clearly in some point of crisis. And the navigator quickly realized, would you like to go to a slightly more private place? Can I sit down and talk with you and understand what's going on? What is it that you need? And then, in the course of that conversation, discovered the woman did not have stable housing and had recently been evicted. So she talked with her, took the time to figure out what was going on, what services, what places, what might meet her needs at this time. And the quote here gets to that point of the spirit of service and really understanding what the resident needed and taking that time, understand what the resident needed, and not being siloed by, well, this is what my department offers, so this is all I can give you. But taking that time to understand, make the connections that she needed, and, you know, we try to follow up and try to understand what the connections are and ensure that the outcome is successful. And we were really happy that this woman, because the navigator gave her her card, called back to say thank you a day later, so that she got to the, I think it was Radius, one of the community providers that was able to help her. She got to spots and got connected to a bunch of resources that she needed and was really able to connect and have a better outcome. And I think that's an example of, it wasn't the most efficient service provided. She sat down and had a long conversation to understand these women's needs, but it got to the outcome, it got to the effectiveness that we want. That really embodies the work that Enterprise Services is striving to do every day. And some stories are more impactful than others, and this one really touched my heart. And some are just, you know, the ordinary, I need a phone number for X, Y, or Z, and the person is able to help. But that's really what the navigators and our customer support embodying every day of their work. I'll hand it over to Melinda to go into a bit more.
Great. Well, thank you for having us today, Madam Chair, Commissioner. I'm excited to share a little bit about how we got here and where we are today. And again, the first couple of slides, you'll notice will be really similar to the update that we gave you guys last year, but just the ground where that is. So pre-pandemic, as you all know, this concept of a navigator and concept of service centers throughout Ramsey County was not new in 2020. The work had begun prior to 2019 in the Residents First program and in the first co-location planning, and its similarities of how we could do integrated service delivery started to come together in places such as the Equal Opportunity Center, or SPOC as we call it. And then as the pandemic hit, it fast-forwarded our work, and so we stood up 5 service centers as a response. I'm really proud of Ramsey County's response to that, is noting how across the metro area, many people, we get people from other counties saying they told us to come to Ramsey County because you're open. So we knew that what we were doing was really meaningful across the metro area. So
there's good stats that, right?
sorry, I don't mean to
We're here to
derail,
help.
it's just like,
It embodies that culture of service.
Yeah, I mean,
Exactly.
it embodies the culture of service, and I don't say that to poke fun, I say that in terms of we recognize the critical need, that this idea that the service centers and the role of a navigator, could fulfill. So we stood up 5 service centers and redeployed staff from all across the county. They put up document drop boxes across the county in those service centers, and then trained navigators in 4 critical impact areas, so social services, workforce solutions, and property tax services. And then transitioned to operationalization in information and public records. So there's like 4 words I struggle with every time. Operate, that one, and compartmentalize. So if that's on here.
You
that's
can
what
blame
it
me
is.
for putting that on there, sorry.
Right. No, so we transitioned in IPR in early 2021 with hiring permanent staff in April 2021, with community included in the hiring panel. Really proud of making sure that we were including those voices at the table in making hiring decisions. Created the Enterprise and Administrative Services Department, as you all know, and established early on the Operation Advisory Councils and Senior Advisory Councils to help guide our work. And as Katrina alluded to earlier, this whole team approach, and really kind of setting up a unique structure in how we actually deliver services and how we work and function as a team is something that I'm really proud of, and I want to kind of explain a little bit more here as we talk through this. So a whole team approach that rotates across all service centers. So I know that when we started this work, one of the points that really got driven home to me was that supervisors are going to be rotating across all sites, that it's important that we don't have site-based staff, so that there's this culture of Roseville or culture of Maplewood or culture of Metro Square. And so truly, when we hire, we are looking for those teamwork characteristics, for adaptability, for flexibility, and also supervisors their performance is based on how well they work together to support the navigators and support all sites equally, not just how pretty they can make Roseville or downtown and whether or not they bring in the right bagels on a Friday morning. That is really what their role is based on, is working together to support all sites.
Yes, the bagels are good.
Yeah.
Metro Square has a lot of food added, I'll just put it
So, and then today, so as you all know, we have service centers at Metro Square, our downtown location, at Maplewood Service Center in Roseville. We have a strong community partner location where navigators rotate to through the Ramsey County shelters, so Mary Hall, Bethesda, and Luther. And in the past, when they were in hotels, we were there as well. St. Paul Opportunity Center is a strong presence and will likely continue to grow in terms of the hours and time that we're going to be spending there, just because of the need and the connections that we're making and we're a role there. New as of last year till now is Neighborhood House, and working with them on a weekly basis, and also learning that their connections are stronger than our connections and how we can leverage those partnerships there. And then had a strong presence at outreach events in our community throughout last year. So we were at places like this, an EAT event, or we did a vaccine clinic at a mosque. We were at a back-to-school event for Open Cities, and then partnering with the libraries to do their library pop-up events and making sure that we could tack on to the work that they're doing as well. We have 18 team members right now, as you can see the breakdown, and then, as I mentioned before, strong advisory councils, both operationally and at the senior level, and then, of course, including.
Just a question for.
Oh, yes,
clarification.
Commissioner Ortega, yeah.
Do the 10 navigators move around, or are they site-specific?
Yes, the 10 navigators move around, so we have a 2-week rotation where they're moving from site to site, and then what we call an outreach rotation, where they're moving from the different outreach locations. The other thing that I think is really unique about how we have set up, of course, I feel like we're also pandemic babies, is that we are heavily on teams. So there's not a shared drive the way I remember as a staff person heavily relying on a shared drive. Navigators that are in the community are using the Teams drives and chatting with each other. We work together across teams heavily and support each other in that work too. So both in supervision and in their work as
It's actually a really good test, if I could just add. So often, one of our biggest constraints is we just are a legacy county that's been around forever. And so when you talk to counties that are growing and they're growing things from scratch, they just aren't encumbered by what you just described. This is probably the first at scale, like, test of how we're not encumbered by how we used to do business, because it's a completely clean slate at day one. So it's really interesting to hear you say that.
For me, it was really refreshing to save things in a whole different area and feel like I was cleaning house, and then training people to kind of come alongside and just operate differently.
So I have a question, on the partner locations. So with Neighborhood House and the St. Paul Opportunity Center, are we using their physical space, or are we actually partnering with them on their programming as well? I mean, because I know, like, in the libraries, we're basically using the physical space of the libraries. I mean, I know the librarians help us and everything, but are we actually partnering in their programs when we're in those locations?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's both.
Yeah.
So we're partnering with and I'll touch on this too later when I talk about how partnerships could look different depending on their location. And I think that Neighborhood House is unique because then if they're at, like, Dayton Bluff, for example, we may go there, but it's technically the partnership is with Neighborhood House.
Thank you.
Some key activities from last March until now. So as you all know, we have moved from the East Kellogg Building to Metro Square. The Maplewood Service Center now is in an old cafe space, and then we've taken over the Duns Brothers space in Roseville. Lots of opinions on that, but it's working out really well. Please come to Roseville.
People ask for coffee.
And the little coffee makers?
Where do you get the coffee?
There's an inside joke about how we could rate who should put money in the pot for every time coffee is out at Roseville. Maybe we just have a coffee cart. Lots of ideas flowing.
We threw that out to Jean Kruger, and you could imagine her like,
Break that silo down.
I'm with you. I'm with you on that.
we can get some licensure for some coffee carts in the library.
If they have working coffee shop, we could figure something out. And then we are excited to expand partnerships, and we've been able to do that this last year in a strong way. So we have a strong partnership with Petrus or Productive Properties, where we are going out with them to do their home visits on properties that are going to be forfeited, and excited to think about how we can move more upstream and more prevention, but just being able to offer support and services to people that are going through that in our community, and also housing stability. We've been able to work with them closely, not only in the work with physically being in the shelters, but also as they've taken on this emergency rental assistance and how navigators can play a role in making both outbound calls, but also being available for help with applications for some other key partnerships that I want to mention too are Bridge to Benefits. And so we are now a location on their application if people qualify for certain programs, directing people to come for application assistance. And that connection was made through the preschool development grant. So December Brakefield, as you guys met earlier today, we've been a strong operational partner with them since the beginning of the development grant, and I see a strong presence for where navigators work is going to be in the future of coordinating early child care resources throughout the county. Election services. So we're election judges and places where you can drop off your absentee ballot. That was new for November 2020, especially in the height of the pandemic, to say we're going to train you to be election judges also as you're in your navigator role. But it's been an interesting ride, and we're excited for what comes in the future as elections change and this kind of way of voting is normalized. And then we have a blueprint to guide our work. So we're able to be nimble, and we're able to be flexible and adaptable, but also have a sort of North Star for where we're going with county and community partners to give input and to guide our work as well. And then continuing, we have a process for staff performance and skills assessment, so trying to look at what are those skills and qualifications that make up a navigator role, and how we can do some self-assessment in our performance appraisals, and thinking about how that fits in with the countywide work moving forward. A couple of steps that we've taken in this direction and need to kind of figure out how to make this more practical so that it fits in with the countywide. And we are hiring. We are hiring right now to expand the team for 5 navigators.
All right, now I'll dig into a little bit of data with you guys, so you can see where we're at right now in terms of resident engagement, our navigators and customer support assistance track. So this first slide here just purely shows the number of resident engagements, enterprise services that's tracked in our own database that we maintain, and all this information is on the open data portal as well. You can see from this slide that the downtown service center dwarfs every other interaction, every other method where our enterprise services is engaging with. That, is a factor of history, a factor of, where people know to engage with the county. And so I think that will always continue to be a very popular, a very high traffic place, but also as we continue to build and expand services, I hope, and our goal is to expand and grow at our other locations, but also the phone line and virtual connections and that. We'll get more into that later on in our presentation. But obviously downtown is the biggest service center. And I'd also note, while the total over from October to, it was almost all of March in this data, missed one day because of when the presentation was due to you guys. But almost all of March, you can see it's 24,000 or nearly 25,000 resident engagements. And just on the phone line over that time, there was, 37,000. So the 8,500 number does also get a lot of calls. And there's 2 clerks handling that. So,
Commissioner Ortega, did you have a question?
And I know this data might have, excuse me, might be dated but I'm looking at downtown in Plato. Are we talking about the same services or type of services?
they were the same type of services offered. Plato, of course, was from what, October 2020 to November?
Well, that's why I'm saying the data might be dated.
Yeah,
So
the Shoreview and Plato one is.
I get it.
Yeah.
But where is, Wellstone, the neighborhood house in this?
That'd be in community organizations.
That'll be in community organization.
Yep.
I'm just wondering, do we have a sense of, and how old is, Wellstone or neighborhood house?
So
How long?
neighborhood house, when we started them and where they're now, we're just opening back up to even having people in. Things like that, but
So it could be that we have a lot of folks coming downtown that could be moving to these, especially neighborhood house.
Yeah.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Commissioner Ortega, I think what you should expect, what we saw right away, Plato, Shoreview just didn't fit well as physical locations, as you can see quickly. on
Yes,
those numbers.
that's why I'm.
Those community organizations, though, we do anticipate will begin to grow as we move forward. And I think phone and online is another area we expect some of that.
Yeah, but I mean, that's long-term over time, but I think to your point, Katrina, with some of this, it's just behavior over time. You can live on the west side, you're still gonna come downtown, so there's gonna.
Are you working
Some
downtown?
education to do, with community and folks and not assume. And I know the data is dated, so, I mean, you'll probably have a better observation a year from now. That's the only question.
Thank you.
Chair, Commissioner, there's a couple more slides that will show a little bit more of what you're talking about, but what you said, I think is like very accurate in terms of where we're envisioning, and also, while the numbers, and we'll show this in a second, at Metro Square, or downtown, went down a little bit between east to Metro, they're now back up, which is good. We don't want residents to not know where to find us, but at the same time, we did see some uptick in Roseville and Maplewood. Maplewood in particular continues to grow. So some of it is that communication, like you said, you always know where to go downtown. They don't know that there's another option.
Well,
So there's
that's
that
why I'm bringing it up, it
continued
should be integrated into what we're doing now. And it's not just putting a poster on the wall.
Definitely.
Commissioner McDonough?
Yeah, and the one thing I would add, or I want to get a sense from you guys, because I totally agree with what you've talked about, and I you know, my east side residents, Maplewood's probably actually easier, except for the transit option. You know, it's a transfer to get there pretty much, where downtown's direct. But, you know, to make that shift and actually provide that, for residents to start having confidence they can use these other ones, we gotta be in this for the long game then, right? You've gotta be committed to this, even though maybe the numbers aren't quite where you're at. But everybody's shaking their head like, we know that, and that helps when we can eliminate or alleviate some of the pressure on downtown then too. But you have to be in it for the long game on this.
I have a question about the number of calls. Is it about the same? It's just now spread out over different, areas, or did calls increase, or no? This is about how many calls we get from residents. Or are they combined now because you're calling one number versus other numbers before? I mean, you were calling maybe multiple numbers before. Now you're just calling one number. Can you just talk to me a little bit about the numbers of calls?
Yeah, so do you mean for the 8500 line versus like before we had
Yeah,
navigators and
just
before?
wondering if people are accessing us more, maybe just generally, or are they, and probably the pandemic is is hard to know.
Yeah, well, there is definitely you can see some trends in the numbers. I don't know if you guys, Sarah, maybe with your perspective, or I don't know if the 8500 numbers have changed pre-pandemic versus now. There is work we are doing, and that's some of our next steps, to look across the county. And my shorthand for it is, do we want to get to a point of creating a 1-800 Ramsey number?
Yeah.
So there's only one number people call, and they can get to navigators, they can get to, financial assistance services. Because right now, there's a different number when people call for financial assistance services versus calling the 8500 number or calling the navigator line. It doesn't mean that someone calls one of those numbers and can't get to financial
They have to be transferred.
but that might not be where they end up, you know, it might not be where they start or end up. So there's definitely work to be done on our phone lines in the county and improve that resident experience. And you'll see it a little bit in one of the next slides of how our, addition to the financial assistance services number affected our phone line calls, and feeds into our kind of our vision for the future. Do you guys have anything else other to add?
With that, does it mean that we're still learning what 8500, the trends on that too? It definitely did go down during the pandemic.
Okay, county manager.
Go ahead.
I guess on one last thing, as I looked at this slide before today, I had one question on it. So, or just kind of the reaction. I mean, the numbers, yes, skew towards downtown. There's no surprise to that. We've been seeing that. There's lots of reasons why right now. It actually stands out to me, though, that if I were to add up Roseville plus Maplewood plus shelters, I get a pretty significant number of navigator visits in places that in the past, the answer would have been 0, right? Like, when I read it that way, that's correct. I mean, and so you can look at it as, yeah, downtown does a lot more relative to one of those sites, but you add the 3 of them together and you end up at 6,000 across this time period in brand new spots, and it's 40% of what happened downtown. And it starts to say, like, I'm actually kind of impressed at how quickly people's behaviors are starting to change when I view it through that kind of a lens.
Commissioner Ortega.
My question, I have another question, but just to what you said, that's why I said it's gonna take time. The issue is not, service could increase over there, but the issue is really how do we, because if you have staffing, right, you want to.
Yep.
My question has to do with, you say you were looking at a 1-800 number, which I get, it makes a lot of sense, but here's just a word of caution that I think just from what I'm hearing from constituents, you know, that comes through my office in terms of they can't connect for whatever reason with the county for services, that when you go to an 800 number, what you tend to do, or everybody's doing, is you have a very large menu. And sometimes, while for you and me, 3 steps is not a big deal, we might even consider that as quick. A lot of folks that are used to going in person, that you're gonna lose them. I'll tell you that right now. They're gonna hang up and they're gonna be angry. Because the menu keeps spreading to another step. Once you get past 3 steps, it's bad news all around. Then I'm gonna get the complaints. I'm only kidding, but that's.
No, Sharon, for sure, I appreciate that, and, I think we were gonna talk, maybe we have a quote, or we were talking about it yesterday, that often the navigators that are working the phone line or in a service center, they hear from a resident, oh, I finally got to a person. And, you know, that is nothing about other phone lines, that's just, we've all been there. The 3
Right.
steps or the 10 steps or whatever it takes, and you finally get to a person. So that's why I say I kind of joke the 1-800-RAMSEY in the concept, because what does that actually mean? I don't want to your point, I don't think we want to create a 10-step process for somebody to get to a person or get the service they want. So how do we ensure that the phone lines serve the community in the way that they want to be served, and to my point earlier, in the most effective way? And that may be a 1-800-RAMSEY number, but it might not be.
Yeah.
And so what is the best way to serve our residents? And like you guys all nodded your head, we all understand that feeling of, oh, I finally got to a person, can you actually help me? And that's, I think
Just press 0.
Yes.
But it doesn't always work.
No, the
I know,
secret
they've
number
stopped
is
it.
0.
They've stopped it now. You can't just.
You gotta keep pushing numbers
You
against.
can't just press 0 anymore.
They get to, right,
Don't listen to Mary. Don't listen to Mary Jo.
I was on there for 23 minutes.
I know.
Mary Jo send you back to the beginning.
It doesn't happen anymore.
Madam Chair, one last part,
Yes.
just to give voice to it, because there's this is the interplay that's complex between navigator services and then as you drill into department-specific areas as well. Kathy's not here today, she's off today, but we'll have more to come still on these conversations around specifically min choices and financial assistance and intake, where we still have, I mean, that's where the bulk of these challenges are coming up. Volume is part of that issue, but there's a number of things, like, just know that that's a part, and this always plays into it, and long-term, how does this alleviate some of that is absolutely a question. But in the meantime, like, I want to acknowledge it's a real issue, and I don't think you're fully gonna hear an answer with this crew today on that, but that's also being a conversation happening with health and wellness.
Thank you.
And
Thank you so much.
I think, speaking for enterprise services, and I'm 99.9% sure Kathy would agree with me, but also thinking about the in-person, like we talk about a one-stop shop at a service center. We want that one-stop shop on the phone. So you get what you need and you connect to that service with one call. You might get transferred to somebody else.
Not a push 3, 4,
Yeah.
5.
Exactly, yep. And you might, you might get transferred to somebody else to get that answer, but you don't have to call back 5 times and get your call dropped and be on hold and, all the things that we know frustrate when you're trying to get to somebody in the phone line.
Great.
All right, so this, just breaks down the resident engagement over time. The dark blue line, that is the highest one, in all places or most places, is the downtown service center, so it reflects the last slide. And the majority of the ups and downs you can track to how COVID was, and people wanting to come to in-person services or not. And as I referenced, we were talking about phone lines, so you guys gave me the introduction. When you see that peak in November of 2021 for the Navigator phone line, that is when we added the Navigators as an option on the FAS 64444 number. And I say this in, like Ryan said, that there's work to be done there, and I'm not saying it is any sort of, in any sort of negative reflection of that number, because we know that there's work to be done there, but when we were added to that number, people pressed any button they could to get to a person if they were getting frustrated. Yeah. And so they pressed the Navigator option and they got to the Navigator, but the Navigator wasn't able to help them with whatever they needed. And so that's not the experience we want our residents to have. We want to get to a point that if somebody calls whatever number it is, and they want to get to a Navigator, they can get to a Navigator quickly and get an answer, or they want to get to FAS, they can get to FAS and get that answer. But just adding us to the existing structure didn't serve the Navigators, didn't serve the residents. So we removed ourselves from that line, but it also highlighted how FAS and enterprise services and other min choices, other parts of the county, how we can all partner to improve that experience. So it really did highlight, that's where we need to start, that's where we need to focus, that's where we're working with Kathy and Jennifer Schuster-Yeager and others to understand how can we improve that phone experience for residents.
Wow. Commissioner Ortega?
Well, that's exposing the other half of that. Take aside the navigator. It tells you we have issues on the existing.
Yeah.
So, Madam Chair, on that, I mean,
Yeah.
the one yes, the contextual piece to bring in, so case, like intake, numbers are way up. They're way up, and it's, as the state has gone to a more simple way to be able to bring the numbers in, it's led to a big surge. And so we're gonna have conversations about this in the coming months multiple times. And it's, right now, how do we ask the board to be a part of the right type of capacity building, so it's not misplaced, is what we're trying to work through right now. It could be that it ends up being asked for actually here as a part of bring it back in through a process that makes sense. It also might not be. We haven't quite gotten to that part yet, but that's, when I say what we're trying to peel back, that's the pieces right now to it.
Clearly, this is an issue that we all care about. Obviously, we care about all of it, but thank you.
And I don't want to get ahead of Kathy or Jennifer or anything on any of it, but one of the things that it has been in the works and was kind of put on hold a little bit during the pandemic is there is some money from Residents First executive sponsors provide some money for them to delve that phone line even more and come to some of those solutions. So we're already headed down that path. In part, Enterprise Services is right there alongside as a partner. The other thing I would note in terms of the Navigator line increasing is that, and then decreasing in March, is they were taking a lot of calls for the rental assistance, working with the Housing Stability Office, so we saw a significant uptick. And you can see, as I kind of referenced quickly earlier, a drop in the downtown there in February, and then now it's back up in March. And I contribute that myself. Sarah can tell me whether I'm wrong to extrapolate this way, but I think it's due to COVID and the move from east to metro. And so now I'm happy to see the numbers going back up. Residents are finding them. And then this slide gets a little bit, Commissioner Ortega, to what you were referencing. As we, on the left side of it, earlier on, as we had Shoreview and Plato, you can see the numbers there. And when they dropped off, the numbers at the shelters and at our community organizations, we were able to shift staff and focus there and increase our resident engagements and interactions at community organizations and in the shelters. So it really does show a reflection of how we were responding to what we were seeing as the community need. And as Melinda referenced earlier, with the community organizations, it did drop off last fall with the increase in COVID, with Delta and Omicron and the COVID case. Spaces weren't open. So now we're in a place where not only is COVID looking better, but also we're hiring more navigators, and that's one of our key next steps, is to look at how we can increase those community organization partnerships. Great.
Commissioner McDonough.
I think this was asked earlier, but remind me, are we offering the same opportunities for services at the community organizations as we are in our own sites? So that folks aren't, all of a sudden the word's out, well, don't go there because you can't get this done there.
Good question, Commissioner. I can answer that a little bit. We are offering, so at SPOC, for example, we have a strong partnership with or a process with FAS. So at every service center, there's a financial worker, and at downtown and at Maplewood, there's a community care lab. So Workforce Solutions is a part of sort of the offerings within that service center. And when we're on outreach or on location, we have an outreach partnership with FAS, what that looks like. So it might not be a financial worker on site at that location, but we have a process to have to do a phone interview if it requires an intake, or how to get in touch with a financial worker. So we have a different sort of on the road process to make sure that we can meet some of those needs there too. But it is a little bit different.
And I would encourage us to think about how can it, because I'll use Workforce Solutions in Ling, right? When she moved into the libraries and the centers, she's seen her connections and outreach was working really well. And then she went the next step and started moving into HAP and CLUES and community organizations, and it even grew more rather than dropped off. And I think that's because she wasn't offering anything different when she moved into those community organizations, and maybe even stuffed up the offering because she had a trusted messenger in the community, or somebody who was already trusted for individuals that walk through the door, right? And how do we leverage that trust that's already there? And ensuring that, because I'm with Raphael, I think for the long game, the community organizations is probably our best spot to be versus, even our own spots within the community.
And we are seeing a lot more traffic at SPOC, for example, since housing stability has kind of come back and organized both internal and external offerings that Ramsey County. Yeah, there's work to be done on how we can make consistent services.
Great. Yeah, and I just wanted to say, too, that it has always been a part of our plan since before these two came into their roles, to gradually, over time, increase the number of hours that we spend in our community organization, with our community organizations and in their locations. So, we're hiring, and part of that ramp up is so that we can continue to increase the number of hours we spend there.
And, can I add one more thing in that, this is already in discussions and planning, in particular, like your work with public health and the prevention clinic and how are we present there as an example. But as the trial happened and the closing down the East Building and the more increased talk about people not going back to the East Building or limiting presence there, I'll specifically call out Financial Assistance Services since we've worked so closely with them. Tina and others on our team are like, we want to be in community. We don't want to be back in the East Building. Mm-hmm. And so part of those conversations is, how do enterprise services, FAS, social services, housing, let's partner with PAP or Neighborhood House together and provide those services. So it's not that FAS is there on a Wednesday and we're there on a Thursday.
Right.
We didn't know that FAS was there the day before. That would never happen. So, no, never happened. So how do we partner, like create that
That's
partnership?
my big question at the end. I'm saving it for the end.
I love it.
I was trying to get ahead of you. So that is part of our next steps, and we do talk about it later on in the presentation, so I'm just getting ahead of myself too. But that's a big, important piece of that's how we really integrate services and serve the residents in a one-stop shop, whether it's our building or someone else's.
Commissioner Carter, we all want to jump in on this one, but we can have a long conversation at the end, but Commissioner Carter.
I am just squeezing myself, not be exuberant with the development that we're seeing here. But I really am. It's great to see.
I was going to say, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm fine with that kind of exuberance.
It is really great to see this movement into community, and the timing is right. Of course, we've learned so much. We're able to go. Our partnerships are evolving. The services are tailoring themselves to a point where we can navigate. We can attach navigation to help guide someone toward coaching. These are really welcome opportunities. As Commissioner Ortega already said, you didn't use the word flexibility, but the joy of having a flexible staff that is able to meet the needs as we see the needs growing or even decreasing in terms of population visiting in these areas is great. And not to target, this is the resource we're going to have here forever and always, because things do change. Mm-hmm. The community may change and respond a little bit differently. I'm thrilled to see that. And what you did say was this is a long-term strategy. We can't respond to that need going up and down by taking things away. We have to make sure the services are comprehensive so that people do know they can get things there, but even more so that they're growing, that we're learning to do more and more with our partners and to integrate with their work, because then we truly are providing the kind of, I want to say wraparound, but it does get to that point And so anyway, I was just sitting here trying not to be exuberant about it, and trying not to say anything, but this is fantastic, and I remember the work that we did before with Open Cities when Melinda was there, and there were difficulties. We couldn't figure out the partnership necessarily, who's paying what and doing what. And so the fact that you guys are intensely embedding this work together with our partners is just amazing and wonderful, and thank you for allowing me to pontificate and be exuberant for a moment.
Madam Chair.
Okay, yes.
Well, Commissioner Ortega, then
I was just gonna, incorporating part of what everybody's saying. I've been out of grad school 40 years, and everything I've heard in the last 10 years is not new. It's been tried, but we've not come up with the right combination of things, is what it comes down to. And that's what you're experimenting with. So I'd rather that we take time and look and be able to quickly eject and replace or experiment a little more. Because, what are you talking about, the outreach you're talking about, the co-location? This county, in our term, has done co-locations. Back in the late 90s with the schools, and it wasn't sustained. Whatever we do has to be sustained, because it is a long-term deal. And we're talking, put it in motion for decades, not years.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioners, I just want to go back to what I said in my opening about this team really championing that growth mindset and that mindset of continuous improvement. One of the reasons why Sarah is here is because we are always looking at opportunities and how we can better serve our residents and engaging them, but also, that spirit of failing forward and doing intentional work with our internal partners like FAS and others to make sure that we are collaborating and making sure that, we do know when FAS is, at a partner organization, and, we're constantly looking at ways that we can be more effective and, yes, ultimately efficient in how we serve our folks. So it's all about the growth mindset, failing forward, continuous improvement. We live in that space.
Okay, thank you.
So, this is just a breakdown of the languages that has been used in the resident interaction. So I want to say that is what is the language that was used when the resident was talking with the navigator or the CSA. It may not be the person's native language. It may not always be the person's preferred language, but they were able to conduct whatever service provision that they were doing at that time, that engagement in this language. And so that was the language the resident wanted to use. So the majority of it is English. 88% of the engagements were conducted in English. And so the remainder on here is the breakdown of the other languages that were used. You can see that Somali is the largest, followed by Karen, and then Hmong. Yeah. I thought the next one was other. I'm like, that's not right. And then Hmong. So those are the three most commonly used languages, and that is also, while the percentages may be different, that is the top three languages that are also used in the service center with interaction with interpreters. So it's pretty consistent that those are the most common languages that we're seeing. I will note, that's why I was specific in saying that the resident, this engagement was conducted in English or another language, that these do differ a bit from the numbers that we see on the survey with residents, because that's when they were asked what language would you prefer, what language you use at home. I can't exactly, the question was phrased. So that you are going to see some difference there.
Commissioner Ortega.
I was just a comment on, so, for example, I could see where in the order of them coming, Somali, Karen, and Hmong, in that descending order, in terms of being bilingual and that. But if you're going beyond that immediate resident, so if I'm coming in for service, right, now I might be bilingual. Most Hispanics are bilingual to a certain extent, even if they were born in a Latin American country, anywhere in South America. So they might come and talk in English, but now if you have to deal with the family, now you got a moving towards Spanish and not English. And that's just because, you know, we are trying to be family-centric, and we're usually dealing with the whole family and issues in the family. So that's a little deceptive in terms of the person that presented themselves for service. Or if the daughter presented themselves for service for the mom.
Yeah, this data point, I think is informative, but it's limited in its use, yeah? So then this is the final slide of the kind of resident engagement breakdown, and reflects the service area sought by the resident. Note that this is a different time period because we did change how we were collecting this data and how we were tracking it in June of 2021. So this goes only back to June 2021 till today. You can see that almost 50% is financial assistance services, and then 40% is a resident general need. And the main categories under resident general need include shelter referral, food or housing referrals, administrative needs, which could be printing, scanning, copying something in the service center, making a phone call, and then also the use of the public computers that are in the service center. And then some of the other areas on there are obviously a much smaller percentage of what service area was sought, but include the rental assistance, property tax.
A really helpful chart to see, because at the beginning and the outset of trying to create this, and I know that we weren't the first ones to try and create this here, the conversation had happened many times. The conversation would always be, so are you just cross-training financial workers? Would be the question, would be one way it would come up. We're like, the new people aren't gonna know everything about X service, so how is that gonna fit? I think what this gets to is the idea of, well, this is why you don't want them to only be cross-trained as one thing, because there's 50% in one spot and then 50% of other needs. And having this now is starting to give us a sense and understanding of the niche that a navigator can very importantly play without being the deep dive issue area expert in only one half. And quite frankly, before this existed, everything here was served through a different interaction with an expert. That was the way in which we had so like when I look at this and I think about the residents' first movement and the silo breaking that the board's pushed for, it really stood out to me when I think about that every one of those would have represented a different person. And we're trying to get to a spot where you put the complexity of the navigator on top of it to say, let me work across the wheel with you in different ways.
Thank you.
I did want to just point out.
Commissioner McDonough, then Ortega.
Yeah, and I know you want it, but,
Yeah.
you know, I think, like, to just what Ryan said, and that's a big leap, right? And that's a really good spot to be. But, you know, going and kind of where I talked at the end when we had the open discussion, but on that 49% financial service worker, you know, just going down a couple more layers, and I seen actually one of the quotes, right? My worker did return my call. So how much of that need on the financial service worker is more about a capacity issue and responsiveness, and this is the only way they could get a response in, is to actually talk to somebody, because I live that side, all right? I've lived that side where I haven't heard, you know, my wife's left 20 messages and we still don't get a call, or their voicemail says, you know, call between 8 and 4:30, 5 days a week, and they actually work 4 10s and we don't even know it, right? And so that's what, you know, is like, what's the next level here? And, you know, maybe that's partly in your area, but it isn't just necessarily about what area they need to get connected, it's why they couldn't get connected at least maybe on their first try to that area, especially in financial services. And maybe that gets to the piece of, you know, the capacity issue, right?
It definitely does, Commissioner. And I actually hope we get to a spot where it's not after a breakdown that the call comes here. I actually personally would hope that we build a system in which It starts at a place that assesses across this entire wheel and then goes
Yes.
into the correct space, which is not fully how we're at. And there are capacity issues that would be represented by these colors on here as a part of it, and that's that part that this alone won't solve.
And that's why it's important to know what's happening. Because if we start building this with this huge focus on financial services, where it's not necessarily a silo that needs to break down, it's actually an internal capacity of capacity, or it's a bureaucratic process that we've put in place that needs to be taken apart, right? And that's not something your people can do, but if we start building what you're doing, thinking, well, half of our calls or half of our interactions or half the residents are seeking, FAS stuff, when actually the reason they're seeking it is, in Ryan's words, a breakdown versus more of just the inability to thread the needle to get to where they need to be.
Thanks. I'm just doing a time check because we go till 3 is what we're scheduled. We have a lot of slides to go, and so, but clearly, this is really good discussion, and we have a lot of questions on this, so I'm just gonna ask, when we get there, either we decide, see how we're doing.
We can come back.
Yeah, or come back, yeah. So, I want to make sure we have some time for the discussion of what we've already heard too. So maybe we'll go another 15, 20 minutes. I want to, and then we'll see where we're at and have some time for the questions that I've asked people to hold. And then, we've also had clarifying questions.
So then, no one.
Okay, go on that
Yeah,
point.
I'm just reacting to what, and I'm brainstorming, right? I'm
Yeah.
not prescribing, I'm not even advocating for any of this, I'm just brainstorming and say, hit this. So, and maybe I heard you wrong, but you were talking about how we put the navigators on these, we were talking about cross-training and the navigators.
Yep.
What came into my mind is we should also try to flip that. In other words, and you don't have to go very deep, but you would expand capacity if the folks that were in silos also get to know how to be a little bit of a navigator.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Commissioner, so I think there is a back and forth of how the system influenced each other over time. One of the things I wrote down, I'll just share it as a thought now. For a long time, we tried to create a system of cross-functionality while having it all through that department-centric way of approaching it. And what you find out is even when capacity opens up, people find a way within that area to somehow absorb it into something related to that area. The navigator model is specifically set up where it's agnostic about service. It's only about service, which creates this whole different way of even opening this conversation up today. While it's challenging to have these sometimes, because it's like we all want to solve it right away, it's important to have it, and we finally have a venue that's different. But you are right. One of the byproducts of it will be the more a navigator works with someone, we'll keep using FAS as an example, about where they see some of the crossover, they start to become acculturated differently in terms of seeing how the system in the world works too. That is absolutely an intentional, hoped for outcome of the system.
All right. Thank you. Okay, all right, we'll move on, we'll take the next section, and then we'll pause, I guess, for some bigger group discussion, and we'll see where we're at. How does that sound? I assume we have to leave by 3, right? Do we don't, unless people want to go longer.
Madam Chair, I think if we can finish the resident feedback piece, we can get through this.
Okay.
And as the Deputy County Manager mentioned, this is an ongoing experience for all of us here, so it's not like we can't keep talking about this all year.
Well, the other thing, Chair, Commissioners, that a lot of the things that we've talked about are embedded in some of our next steps.
Yes.
So we've already touched on a lot of what we were going to talk about too, in some ways.
Okay, great.
There.
Well, Madam Chair, Commissioners, thank you so much. I work in the Health and Wellness Administrative Division, and our team has had the opportunity to collaborate with Enterprise Service for about a few different survey efforts in the past few years. And so I'm here to share with you the findings from 2 of those most recent surveys. So first of all, there has been an Enterprise Services survey that was conducted both in November 2020 and January 2022. I will be talking with you today about the findings from the January 20. This was a survey that was distributed to the downtown library locations as well as the shelters to get folks' feedback about their services on the day they came in. And the way that survey was done is that the navigators and CSAs actually handed out paper surveys to folks and asked them to complete a survey at the time of their visit. They were given a $5 gift card. And as you can see, the number of surveys that were done in those two phases were 114. And the response rates are based on the number of interactions that have been logged by the navigators and CSA in that time frame. And so the January 2022 survey was done over a period of 2 weeks. So we took 2 weeks to collect those surveys. The other survey I'll be going over today is one that we did at Metro Square. And actually, that survey was just done over 2 days, the last day of February and the first, where we had interviewers on site that conducted face-to-face surveys with folks. For that survey, we were able to get 95 participants, and that was considered to be a 31% completion rate or participation rate. I will note that there's even some further history around surveying prior to this. In 2018 and 2019, we worked on survey. This was prior to the development of the service centers, but just kind of think as some of that planning and thinking in motion was starting. And we, at that time, also conducted on-site face-to-face surveys with folks. So I'll refer back to that a little bit when we talk about the Metro Square survey. I'll also note that there are full reports available on RamseyNet for both of these surveys, and encourage you to take a look at them because they'll have even more detail than what I'll have time to go over today. Looking at the Enterprise Services Survey, this was in January 2020. I'll just note that this was done in early January, so for the downtown service center, it was the East Government for that location. And what we found is that the folks that were coming in during that time period, that their primary need that they were seeking help with was around public assistance, either with income, food, childcare, help with medical bills. Those were the most common reasons for visits overall. But that the libraries in particular tended to have, even though their number of visits were lower, the ones that they did have. I will caution that, I think that the data that the Enterprise Services is able to track day by day is going to give you a much more robust sense of why people are coming in than this is more of a snapshot. So that's why it may look a little different than what you're seeing in other data sources. But during this time frame, that is what we saw. There were several questions around customer service satisfaction that were asked. Scores were really high across the board. So on a scale of 1 to 5, 4.5 and higher was kind of the average of how folks were rating their experiences around helpfulness, welcoming space, getting the help they needed. In comparing the different locations, the library sites did have a little higher rating of satisfaction, but that does make sense looking at the primary reason for why people going to those locations are for much less complex needs than those that might be going to downtown or. Folks were asked how they got to the service center on the day that they took the survey, and as you can see, there is a high percentage that are either driving themselves which is the purple. Otherwise, getting a ride from friend or relative, it adds another 10% onto that. But there is also a large percentage that are taking the bus or train or using some other method. And it does vary by location. And so those suburban locations do have a higher rate of people driving themselves. And there's a higher use of public transportation and walking for the downtown and shelter locations. This is going to be particularly interesting to you in the discussion of how, just how the various ways that people can get help and what should happen over the phone versus in person. Do you prefer to get services? And the rates here were pretty strongly in the in-person area, where overall it was 68% that prefer to get help in person. Those did tend to be higher at Roseville and at the shelters, where folks at those locations were particularly looking to get help in person.
And this was an in-person survey though, right?
Yes.
So you were talking to people that were already in person, so
Yeah.
you're probably not surveying all those that were online and all that?
Yep,
Okay,
and that,
so just curious, okay.
yes, and that's actually built into the recommendations
Okay.
later as far as of the whole population.
You know, when you compare, it's the same across the board.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not.
not
you know,
hugely
Yeah,
different.
it's not, it's super, but
Yeah.
it's interesting that Roseville does so much in person.
Oh, because it's easy to get there, I mean,
But as
Get apart.
Joy pointed out, you didn't survey the 85,000 phone calls.
Exactly. People that wanted to do it online.
Or any of the phone,
Yeah, right.
Madam Chair, I
of
would-
the
I
85,000.
think a couple of things. I mean, we
Okay.
definitely see that as the state takes things on to app-based applications. People can say whatever they want in terms of what they prefer. They are voting with their thumbs real quickly. And we have to be prepared for a surge of just a lot more engagement online coming our way. We've noticed that.
Yeah.
But I do think it's interesting as you think about like downtown relative to Maplewood or Roseville. Downtown is the traditional place of in-person service for Ramsey County. And regardless of kind of who you're asking, it's where people have gone. I mean, when I was over at the East Building, it's always people would only hand something because they didn't trust any other way it might get in, all of that stuff, right? Which some of you all heard this.
I don't trust us either.
No, it doesn't. Hand it to me before you leave. So I still think it's striking that
I
a third,
understand that.
you know, a
Want a
third of the
receipt.
people downtown are saying they would prefer a different way than downtown. That's actually a lot to me, because that is not when you run into people
Yeah.
and talk to them, they normally would say, no, the only way I will do this is a physical
Right.
Yeah,
stuff. And
that's-
so there
that-
still is a lot of
that is
opportunity here.
Yeah.
And I will note that we asked this question in the next survey I'll
Yeah.
cover at Metro
Oh.
Square, and that actually tells a little different story.
Yeah.
So we can,
Okay,
we can revisit this, discussion when we move on to that survey as well.
On that point,
oh, yes,
and
Commissioner
on that point,
Carter.
are we sure that people are responding how they want to get service from us?
Let me look at what the actual survey question was.
Good point.
The question was, how do you most prefer to get help accessing county service?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And another thing I'll note related to this is that we did find that about half of folks that completed the survey don't have consistent internet access at home. That would also impact, their ability to access online, online services or having a preference in that area. The next slide is just giving you a sense of the demographics of who participated in this. Again, this is going to look different than the service center demographics because that's collecting that information, for everyone coming through the door, where this is, again, a snapshot of those who agreed to participate in the survey at the time the survey was happening. So there was quite a range of participants from different backgrounds, and in particular, I'll note that this was a paper survey, and it was translated into a few different languages. Somali and Karen were the only non-English languages that ended up being used as actually being used for folks to complete the survey in that language, though there were more that actually they completed the survey in English, but indicated that they did. I'm going to move on now to the Metro Square survey. And just to remind you, that temporary move first happened on January 18th. And these surveys were conducted on site about 6 weeks later over a 2-day period. We did ask a little different questions in this survey than the one I just went over, and actually modeled more those lobby surveys that we did at the East Government Center a few years back. One of the things we did note or ask is, this is a temporary location. How did you know to come here to Metro Square today? And actually nearly half had actually first gone to the East Government Center and were redirected by either a sign or a person, a staff person that let them know to move. And so I will note that there, again, could be many people who had attempted to come to a downtown service center and went there, but never could make it to Metro Square for us to talk with. And so that is, a limitation, again, of who we were able to get feedback from on those days. Others did know to come directly to the Metro Square location, either through a friend or family member, calling one of the Ramsey County phone lines that were referenced earlier, or being told directly by their own financial worker or an interpreter that they may. We did also ask about how they got to this location on Metro Square on that day, and it is pretty consistent that, again, most were arriving by personal vehicle, but there were still a good proportion transit, walking, or taking the shuttle. And again, folks that are walking may not have made it there that day if they had gone to the East Building in their first attempt to get service. Can we move on? So looking at why people came to the Metro Square Service Center, the most common reasons were to either renew or reinstate their benefits or to apply for new benefits. So looking at about a third of the folks we surveyed were applying for benefits possibly for the very first time, if not for the first time in many, in a long period of time. And this really was very heavily in the area of financial services. Some did, have more of a specific need to meet with a financial worker, to drop off paperwork, pick up paperwork. We again asked several satisfaction questions, and again, these were really high on a 5-point scale, around feeling welcome, like they were important, that their question or concern was understood. And that in comparison to those surveys that were done in 2018 and 19, the satisfaction rates were a little higher. And again, it's kind of comparing apples and oranges, but at least it is promising that levels of satisfaction are going up and not going down. One of the areas where it was comparatively lower, still not that low, but 4.2 out of 5 is the statement, I see my community represented in the service center staff. And the folks that were answering that question less than a 5 were predominantly African American and American Indian. And so that was just something that seemed important to know as far as who may not feel as represented in the service center.
I'm just going to do another time check because we have 10 minutes left, and I did say we would have some general discussion. This is great information, and I think surveys are great. I'm going to ask my colleagues what they want to do. I see there's a slide that says key takeaways of both surveys. And I'm just wondering, though, I'm going to ask our deputy, I'm going to ask, the presenters, what would your preference be, whether we continue to go in depth here. I also told my colleagues I would give them a chance to ask some general questions. Just wondering what the will of the group is here, if we want to stay on time. I don't want to lose our members here, but I want to give them a little time to ask some questions that are burning. So what would you like? Or maybe we can see, do we have some questions I know Commissioner McDonough, you have a question that we want to talk about. I'm kind of wondering what we want to do here, because I can see that this presentation could take longer. Do you have time? So then I want to ask the group, do you want to stay longer then? Are we staying past 3? do we want to stay till
Well, I
3:30?
think we're almost done. I'm looking at the,
Oh, we're on 26,
got
there's
a-
41
There's
slides.
41 slides.
oh,
We're on 26.
It's not as many as our friends in economic development, and I know my colleague Joanna is watching, so hey, Joanna.
yeah.
But we do have a few more spots to
Mhm.
go.
Yeah, I
So
mean, we won't
are
finish at
happy to
3.
come back.
Right, we won't finish at 3. I can go till 3:30, but I don't, I'm also happy.
I could go to 3:30.
I need to leave at 3:15.
Okay, 3:15. 3:15, can we say, or what do you think?
at 3:15.
Well, we'll do 3:15, and then we can see how far we can get on that. I mean, I
There's slides
definitely
till
want to
3,
get to
and
the,
then allow 15 minutes.
okay, okay, we'll do
So
slides
when you
till
come
3,
Come back, right?
and then you can come back, right. Then you can come back, yeah. Move to maybe the key takeaways, and then look into the future, but,
The only
Um,
thing I would stress,
yeah.
because we were just saying that Sarah can jump to the key takeaways. One thing that I did want to note, and I don't want to speak out of turn at all, Sarah, about your work, that one of the important pieces of the Metro survey is that we did see overall that residents were a little bit happier, did feel a little bit more welcomed at Metro Square. So that move to keeping the service center at Metro Square is not in, counter to what we were hearing from our residents. And that was really important for us to get that feedback from our residents when we made that decision to keep the service center at Metro Square.
That's great.
And that was part of the reason that we did the survey when we did it, to understand, we may like Metro Square better, but what do our residents?
What do they think? Great.
So I just want to make sure we don't just gloss over that.
And that's exactly, I want you to make the points you feel need to be made. We don't want to shortchange any of this. I just don't want to lose our members here, and yes, you can come back and give more details. But Commissioner McDonough had a
We
comment.
stopped one slide short, but,
Yeah,
I think it's relevant to the conversations we were having. 44% of residents would have liked to have gotten help without coming to a physical office location. Most common preferred method was by phone. Some even noted they first tried to resolve their issue over the phone, but did not receive a call back from their worker, so they felt they needed to come down.
Yeah.
yeah, that's,
Yeah, and so it is interesting when you look at how you ask the question, how it can impact things, and that I think that it's just worth more exploration, and that you can see that you're getting different potential answers over time. But that was a key difference, for people thinking about what is it I needed today, could there have been a different way to take care of this, coming to a physical location.
Just a real quick comment, that's common though. That's 50% of my constituent like. That is-
44% of the residents.
And it's more than that in my constituent.
So, yeah, no, I'm with you. That's why I didn't want that piece to go on.
Yeah.
Because that's where,
Totally.
by the time it gets to us, that's kind of where it's at.
yeah, yeah, boy.
So we could move back to the key takeaway slide, and I will just jump to that second, bullet point, that I think the ultimate story here is that there is a need to continue making services available in several methods, and that the places where maybe there's underdevelopment of potential services there definitely are people that will say, I prefer to be face-to-face, I want to come into a location, I'm always going to feel that way. You're always going to have that range of needs and interests be better addressed. Also noting again that there is a need to get additional resident feedback on all methods of assistance, and again, that the limitation of these surveys is that it was of people who actually could make it into a physical location that we had an opportunity to survey. Considering the complexity of resident needs and frequency of visits in planning service center approaches, we did find that can vary by location, that some locations really have more folks who had much more complex needs that were coming back multiple times in a month to meet with a navigator or to talk with someone, and that may just benefit from thinking about what is the best way to serve those populations that might, that doesn't need to be consistent across all. We did ask at the Metro Square location, which is also unique because they have interpreters on site there, that we asked folks that speak languages other than English at home, how can Ramsey County better own language and understands their culture. And if not that, then access to on-site interpreters is really, you know, it's as simple as that. There's no fancy thing that folks are needing beyond that to really feel better served. I will encourage you to look at the slides, in particular, there's a really nice chart that shows how people who had experienced both with Metro Square and East Government Center, how they compared the two, and that certainly there were many areas where people felt like that they were the same, but when people did find a difference, it was that Metro Square was more preferred or had more met the things that they were looking for in their experience. Because so many people did go to the East Government Center first, I know earlier there was discussion that might need to be, that communication could even be broader in looking at all of the service center locations and what options people have to get. I'll pass it back to Katrina.
Thanks for going through that so quickly.
Yes, thank you. No, we totally appreciate all the data. I mean, let me tell you, I mean, and, right, at some point, we can bring back and do a deeper dive too, so.
Well, and as Sarah said, all these, full reports are available online, and I, neglected to put the links in this PowerPoint, so we'll follow up with an email to you guys, so you have the links to all of them.
Great.
All right, so, we're going now into some next steps. Like I said, we kind of touched on some of these, so we might be able to get through these pretty quickly already, and then have some, time for conversation. So really, as we look at the next steps, we're really, framing it and looking at it from that no wrong door, or one door, depending on how we talk about it, approach. And that really for us means that any time, any method, any language, any service, how does the resident get to the county and access those services? And I would note that under any method, I include there not just in-person, phone, virtual, but also the different kinds of locations. So to get to our point about the conversation about community locations, that would be included in that any method kind of idea. So as we're looking to the future, and Melinda and I will go into a little bit more detail on each of these, how do we continue to develop equitable service across all methods of interaction? So also to the point when we talked about earlier that you don't get a different kind of service if you go to one location for the different or one method versus the different. Specifically, go into a little more detail about our downtown service center and our plans for the near future, how we're looking at community partner locations, how we're planning and looking at expanding online and virtual services and interactions, and then also the phone line a little bit as well. How we continue and expand our community engagement for enterprise services and expand the scope of services that we are able to offer through the NAP support. Quickly, because I don't want to
Could I maybe suggest it this way, actually,
Yeah.
on that? Because this is a really good spot. If
Yeah.
there are questions,
Right.
I would say let's take them now.
Okay.
Because here's the reason I would maybe suggest this. The downtown service center is gonna be a conversation that we bring back here as we, like, lock down exactly how it's gonna get built out. We could take your work here as the guide in that day.
Good.
I think the idea of the community partner locations could be a standalone conversation that we have, particularly as we link it to language and access sometime as we go forward, and we talk about the financial services embedded plans. It's a great opportunity there to build off of what's here with that. Online virtual, I think, deserves its own, like, how are we thinking? I think each of these could stand as topics that
So
we
we're coming back for
schedule.
multiple more workshops.
Right, but it's not only alone, because,
With
yeah,
a limit of 22 slides.
I do think we could, I think for a number of these here, we could plan a way to like-size feedback, given the broad sweep really well. And that might allow for them to ask any questions they have right now, if that's okay, and then we
Yeah,
can.
I think that's great.
Okay.
Yeah, that works.
I really appreciate that, because we do have questions that we want to sort of comment on now, and you can tell we are very deeply passionate about this
Yeah.
whole issue. So thank you for all your information. I'm going to call in Commissioner Fretham first, and then I know Commissioner Ortega and Commissioner McDiarmid, we all have some comments on this. So Commissioner Fretham.
So my first question is about with the rotations across sites. Has there ever been any sort of challenges in serving folks who maybe come back to see a navigator and come back and don't see the navigator they were familiar with?
Thanks for that question, Commissioner. So I wouldn't call them necessarily challenges. We have had that, and we just work together as colleagues to sort of leave notes behind or connections behind if that happens. When we work with departments and other staff, we are pretty clear. We don't carry case loads. We don't necessarily hold on to cases in the same terminology, but because we provide that whole service, we do work really hard to make sure that there's, and that the resident knows that, you know, here's how you can connect with me, here's what you'll experience when you come tomorrow. And it's every 2 weeks, so it might not be the case for that resident unless it's overtime.
And I have one other question, and it looks like maybe you would have covered it in the future slides, but I'm just wondering about the partnering with other groups and things potentially open up more and more different agencies and orgs have these in-person events. How or who would they contact to try to get navigator services at such an event?
Thanks, another great question. So thank you for saying that, Commissioner. We are looking for partnerships right now, and what we are finding is that there's just natural linkages in the community. So, either the navigator phone line or myself, my own, and what we've been doing is just adding them to our schedule as things are starting to crop up right now too. So it's a good time to make those connections.
Thank you. Commissioner Ortega? Oh, are you good? Okay, so Commissioner McDonough.
So I appreciate you kind of stopping us and laying out. I think the one piece that is where I'm really intrigued here, because, I mean, you kind of called it out. I used to have Paul Cross from Dakota County say, you guys do what? And how do you do it that way? I said, well, we had 150 years to build this, right? You guys have been doing this for 50 years, right? Now you build it different, right? And then how do you change it? Because it's so ingrained in how we do our work. You know, and I've raised it a couple times, but I'm really interested because, you know, sorting out where an individual really needs what I would define a navigator, just helping themselves get to where they want to go versus more of solving kind of where they bumped up against, and, you know, this word gets used a lot and how you define it, but a bureaucratic system that we've built that's not working for them, right? And it's a little different then, right? Because here you're just helping them get to where they want to go, and the expectation is once you get them there, they're going to get whatever they need, and, you know, our people are going to, you know, respond accordingly. But when they're coming here because they've bumped up against our bureaucracy, and they're asking, you know, or, you know, if we're building this, I don't know if we're building this to solve that piece of it. And if we're not, what's going to solve this piece? And how do we use what they're building, at least over on this side, to really help identify how we need to start breaking down this? Because, you know, that 49%, I'll go back to the 49% on financial service side. I don't want to pick on them, but, I mean, that's a big part of where the bureaucracy is, right? And when I say bureaucracy, kind of this entanglement of not quite being able to get what they need done versus they know where to go, they're just not getting the response. Yep. But then also other areas where, you know, individuals are coming to you, not necessarily because they don't know where to go, it's because they're not getting the response. How are we kind of pulling that all together, because that's a different piece of work to sort out for us to really truly become residents first in ensuring that, you know, all these people here didn't necessarily need to make this call if we were responding right over here. Does that make sense?
I want to see, Madam Chair, if they have an answer from one perspective, and I'll give a macro answer to it on top of it. Because it looked like you wanted to answer.
Yeah, both Melinda and I have. So thank you, Chair, Commissioner, for that question. And one of the things that, well, I'm going to steal Melinda's phrase here, because I like how she phrased it, that enterprise services is the mirror of the resident experience often. And so we are shining the light on some of those bureaucratic or some of those pain points for our residents. And it's not that they may not have been known by a different area of the county before, but we're increasingly shining that light. And sometimes that puts us in a tough position because we don't want to be going to departments and always saying, there's your skeleton in the closet, we've opened the door, and now we need, like, we want to collaborate with not only the department that we may be seeing that pain point for residents, but also with the community and the resident about how we solve that. So that's where, you know, the opportunity challenges slide that's later on here, we highlight some of that we really want. We're shining that light. It sometimes is a challenge for enterprise services of how we solve that. we want to do it in partnership. It's not we're shining the light, now you have to go solve it yourself. We want to be there alongside that department, those workers, that community, that resident, to figure out how we collaborate to solve that. And really that gets to the heart of that transformational change and continuous improvement. Because we don't, and this is also something that Tracy and Melinda have heard me say a million times, we don't want enterprise services to do steps 1 through 5 of a broken process. So you have 20 steps, it's horrible.
Right.
We've just taken over steps 1 through 5.
Thank you.
We want to change the process if it's a pain point and doesn't work for the rest. And how can we do that alongside, in your example, FAS? Or with housing stability, or whatever department it might be,
Reserving
whatever it is.
picnic tables, right?
Yeah.
New Year's Day is a problem, right?
So really, where is that process improvement and transformational change to no longer have that bureaucracy? And that's where I get to the earlier comment about what's most effective for the resident. It may mean that we're adding more process or more steps in the short term for the county and are not as efficient to begin with. But let's make it most effective for the resident and then solve the back end and solve the efficiencies in the county as we go, but make it as most effective as possible for the resident as the primary motive of how we transform.
So if I can layer on top of that.
Yeah.
So I think if I'm being critical of like the arc of many organizations, but let's turn on ourselves and keep the mirror there, pre-2015, 16 timeline, we would then basically, though, I agree with every observation just made, right? We would basically ask all departments to fend for themselves in a pursuit to the board to somehow settle this someday through the county manager and the board. Like, we just turn the lens there, but it's unclear how we're actually working to structurally solve for the lens. So it's a couple things. One is create enterprise services as a point of intentional tension with the traditional way you operate, but for reasons that it was a missing thing that needed to exist anyway. Now you can see into it, but then the question is, what do you do about it? You have a deputy county manager serve as the resident's first chair, enterprise-wide across the org, who's also made investments into health and wellness technology modernization, which we didn't talk about today, but that's part of the phone issue.
Right.
My phone melted down when I missed mentioning that earlier. Thank you, Zoom participants, for helping me come back. So that's the second piece to it. And you have colleagues who are other executive team members sitting with you from other service teams. Then the third part to that, it always comes back to the idea that the county board sets the strategy of residents first, no wrong door, which is what you use to mediate disputes when people start to feel like it bumps down here. And so what we've tried to do is create multiple systems in which there is natural but productive tension against the status quo. That can be moderated by an executive team member at times that the board has a strategic vision for, and then you can implement effectively across the org, because not everybody can be right in both defending and wanting to change. We have to make decisions on that. And so I think you've heard some of that today, and I think some of what we come back on is how you begin to bring that into action in different spaces as we keep going, and this was but the first step. I hope that kind of helps answer some of them.
Yeah.
I just want to layer a piece onto that too, and that is that we are very intentionally using the fail-forward method that we had engaged in, that you all are aware of, to ensure that we are collaborating well in partnership with FAS and others. So we're being very intentional about that. You know, we had to postpone a little bit, but we're bringing that back up to be able to work with those teams so that we're all on the same page. So I just want you to know that we are being intentional and we are using that fail-forward method.
Yeah. You know, and I really like your answer, because I think, you know, it really gives me confidence you guys are thinking about that and how you can be a catalyst for change, but not necessarily recognize that you don't necessarily own the change, but you can be that catalyst for helping us change by shining, you know, in your word, shining light, and doing it in a collaborative way, not a finger-pointing way. But then, Ryan, to your point, you know, what are those incremental steps, right? I mean, it was in the survey. You know, I called here because my worker did not call me back. A capacity issue, probably, because they're, you know, whatever. we want to get to the transformational change, and how we do that. Part of it might be lessening the capacity load. But how can we do that in an incremental way where, one or two hires where every single call at least gets a human being right there, right? And then there's an actual, communication to their worker of, and then a commitment that within 2 days or whatever is appropriate, incremental, right? 2 days, hopefully isn't going to be the norm, right, that they get a return phone call back, but maybe that's where we need to start as we move towards that, final solution of really doing better. Because I do think in some areas, we are at a crisis where we just need to start seeing that incremental change. Our residents need to see that incremental change. It's showing up over here, and it can actually shape where they can focus if we can start doing some of that incremental change over there. That makes some sense to...
It doesn't. I don't view it as all transformational or all incremental. I view it as you have to do both. Moving out of the East Building on the dime and then saying we're not going back is actually one of those incremental steps to improve the experience in the near term. And working with everybody here, that wasn't a plan for a transformational effort. It was, we brought all levels from frontline groups together up through residents first and said that. So those things need to happen as we go. I do think in the area, we are not unique right now in the call volumes and some of the challenges being faced. And that's not to say we don't need to solve it. It's just, I'm seeing that. Part of that is, I don't think it's incrementalism that's going to fully address that. I don't think it's like an easy 1 or 2 people thing. I think it's both a surge in capacity and then a fundamental redesign, and you're going to have to do it pretty quickly because the system's just not built well.
Yeah. And then I don't want to take up all the time because I know Tony and other folks, but, I'll leave this because I want to connect it back, right? It's really important to have, we always talk about having, lived experiences, right? Well, I've got this lived experience. When Ryan was deputy county manager, right? When my wife was taking Peggy through the process every year in January, she's got to take her through the process, right? I ended up with 2 pages, remember? I wrote it down for you. I had 2 pages of legal paper written where Carol, who's very sophisticated, doesn't necessarily need navigation help. She knows who to call. She knows what to do. But this is where she bumped up against our system that was not working for her or Peggy, right? And that's the piece. No matter how well you guys do, if we still have people, and that's Carol. We've got folks out there that don't have the time, right? Carol the people working 2-3 jobs that don't have the time to stick at it for 2-3 hours on a day to try to break through, right? And so unless we're doing this over here at the same time you're doing this over here, I'm not sure that, our residents are always going to notice this work.
We hear you.
I was just going to add, Commissioner, I appreciate the question too. One of the things that really has been pivotal to me building this whole thing, that has been a key characteristic and passion and what we're looking for when we're hiring navigators and we're building this as we go. When I talk to internal departments and external as well, this is the part that I spend probably the most time on, is that it is about making sure that navigators help residents get to where they're going, but really our charge is to transform. And so it is going to be uncomfortable. There are going to be times where we're in partnership, we're going to have discussions. It's that whole storming, norming, forming, all that group work that we're getting to that part of the meat of it here, where it's not always easy. But I do believe in those honest conversations and authentic relationships. It'll be okay.
And the key will be a safe environment to do this, right? Because people have to be willing to let down the guard of protecting the status quo or the turf. Mm-hmm. And the only way they'll do that is if they know that they're going to be safe in that, because that's their protection, right?
Yeah, good point. Tony, did you have final comment, knowing that we were going to, thank you, Commissioner McDonough, knowing that we're going to be revisiting many of these, not many, but some of these areas again?
Okay, so I won't ask offhand.
I only have a minute. I have 30 seconds of ending, but if you.
So thank you so much. This has been very insightful. At the bottom of my questioning is what we've just been talking about. You can't fix what you don't know. So the survey and gathering information about what we have currently and how we need to improve is so important. You know, I keep wondering what comes first, the chicken or the egg, you know, when we talk about system enhancement and technology, for example. And I'm thankful for the investments in technology that are building forward. But I keep wondering about what we don't know and how technology might help us to know, you know, what we don't know. How many people are waiting, you know, in the queue? How long does it take to get documents? How many times do people's calls not get answered? You know, those kinds of things that technology can help us to know. And so I'm just wondering, and we'll wind up with this question: how are we using current technology to help us understand what our current systems do? Or how can we better, how are we thinking about using that?
Well, fortunately, I can say for the phone lines that the technology is there, that we do have the data on how many calls are you getting, how long are people on hold, how many calls are dropped, how, like, we have that data. And in some places in the county, it looks great. In some places in the county, it doesn't look so great. So fortunately, with the phone lines, we kind of, I don't want to say we know all of the problems,
But we can see it,
we
and
can
so
see
we're
it, and we
tracking
can
it.
see where we improve and how it gets better. And that's where, I do think that, there is a good level of awareness and support for making that change now that, I personally haven't seen in my short time in my current role, and that now the forces are gathering, like, okay, we need to start solving this. Transformation and increment, like, however we get to it, we need to start solving this now. We can't wait.
And how many calls get handled or, you know, passed on or those kinds of things.
And there's, I do know that some of the phone lines where we have the numbers we don't want to see, part of that is people are calling that number because they aren't getting to
To
the
number
person
they
that
need,
they know
right.
they need to call. So it's not just solving the phone line, but it's also solving some of the capacity and other things behind it. So that's why there is, you know, I think energy now galvanized around that and to help move a lot of that work forward. Some of the other areas in terms of how long an application takes and those different pieces, I think that there are different areas of the county that are better at it than others, and we could, there's definitely questions that we could do a better job of gathering the data to answer those questions. And I actually got a very unsolicited, oh, thanks for your support in getting this on the radar, which I was happy to see from somebody in our county, because in the work that we're doing right now with the performance measures, with the supplemental budget year, one of those is a number around phone calls, processing time, wait time, all those things.
That's part of the incrementalism piece we've embedded now across the county in our measures you're gonna see this summer.
Yeah, great. And so thank you. And I wonder about documents and document management, call handling, queue management, those kinds of things that, so my question about what comes first, the chicken or the egg, you know, do we use technology to know what we don't know? Or do we find our way along the path of experience that others have had to improve what we know we can improve, that then gives us more information about what we don't know? So I just wonder how we're weighing that, and if you're considering and coming back as we talk about these other areas with suggestions and recommendations for those kinds of changes that can move us more quickly along the line of phone call, queue management, online, you know, management, documents, you know, things of that sort.
Well, in the broad, like countywide, the enterprise-wide perspective on that, one of the things that comes to mind in how we want to use technology in the future, but it shouldn't stop us from making some of the incremental improvements now, is we want to get to a place, and this is coming from residents first, not so much enterprise services, where we have a resident relationship management system, so that if somebody, Joe Smith comes into a service center to talk to a navigator, that we're able to understand from a dashboard perspective, where that resident is interacting.
Yes.
And right now, we don't have that.
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't think we're gonna turn a switch and tomorrow have it for the whole county. But we might be able to start, okay, this is how Joe interacts with enterprise services and FAS and public health. And then the next 6 months, we can add on social services to that, or add on parks to that, or, so we'll have to grow it.
You said the magic word.
And I also,
yeah.
the other thing I would comment, because the demographics of people that were surveyed were included in the survey results. That's also something that we don't have right now for the resident interaction, is the demographics. Who it is that's coming, who's coming to the navigators, who's coming, because we're not gonna ask the navigators to identify someone's gender and race and language. They have to select that. But if we have a resident relationship management, we know who that person is, they, 6 months earlier, 5 years earlier, could have identified what some of their demographics are if they chose to share that. And then we can easily understand who it is that's coming to our service centers, where they are coming from, and to the point about community things, is there community organizations, would they rather have gone to Clues to get, like, do they live across the street from Clues, and that would have been a better location for them? Right now, that's something we don't have a good handle on, and I hope that we'll get there.
Thank you. And I have more, we'll wait for later. Thank you for allowing.
And basically, these have been great questions, and I just am so excited about the future and coming back to learn more about this. I'm so grateful for the team that you have. You're amazing. You've done so much already, and just thank you so much. I'm not surprised that people that are working on this are making these things happen. So just thank you so much. I can give, anyone else the final words too, but I'm gonna save all my questions, all my additional questions for the next workshops. But just thank you so much. Thank my colleagues for all your good questions and insight. And so
I want to give
yes.
one final thing
Yes.
that comes to mind as we think about all this, and that matters. This and housing stability have been stood up on a 0% to 2.5% of the years during COVID.
Yeah,
So when
that's
anyone wants
phenomenal.
to challenge you that you as a county aren't stretching and you're not trying and you're not figuring out how to do it, you have stood this department and housing stability up with a 2-year, 2.5% total levy number, one of those 2 years being raised, which is, talk about having to stretch, cut, and move to make it happen. And so we do have a lot more to do. What we need to do is start from an environment where we're not, robbing Peter to pay Paul across the board, and I think we're finally getting to that. But I just feel a need to
No, thank you.
ground it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Did you want to have?
Just that I am so proud of these folks and their team. My face literally hurts from smiling so much. I am exuberant, and I just really appreciate them so much.
And I forgot, Commissioner Manis-Castillo, thank you for joining us. We'll hopefully you can ask your questions. Oh, okay, good. So I know she really appreciates all this information as well. So thank you, and we'll just look forward to more information to come. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great. Yeah, I mean, as we get into it, like, oh my God, this is such good stuff. Like, we should have,
Oh, yeah.